I guess there was a few things from last time we could pick up on, but there's one thing I do want to ask you about, um, which is your thoughts on how to run a research group that is completely remote or partly remote, and how you
Oh yeah,
combine
you did
different
mention that
aspects of
last
that.
time. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe you could just briefly describe the size of the research group you run, and how you run it, and then I can pepper you with questions.
Sure. So, and I mean the permanent research team size changes, and we have temporary people who come on who work with us on project basis. So we have half a dozen or so permanent, semi-permanent folks who are consistent members of the team. We have another probably half dozen or so people who periodically but somewhat consistently join us um, on a shorter term basis to contribute to projects in various different ways. Um, and it's yeah the it's been an interesting learning experience figuring out how to manage the team and to be max sort of optimally productive to the extent that we can when everybody is largely remote.
Mm.
And I suppose well, I can talk about sort of what we've done to address specific challenges that we've had, um, and I can talk about things that have worked and things that haven't worked. So, is there a particular structure or way you want me to talk through things, or anything in particular you want me to focus on?
Yeah, that all sounds great. I think I'll just ask you questions as we go along, and steer you where I want to know more. But before we move on to that, yeah, regarding the mix of permanent and more temporary people, this is one of the things I've been struggling with a bit. So the more temporary people, like what kind of, they're like project based, or is it uh, based on a
Yeah, so we
block
have
of
we have
time?
sort of uh, a core team of researchers who work on who are available to be drawn into any of the uh, specific pieces of research that we have. All of our research is project based, so we have a project pipeline that's got at any given time a couple of dozen different things in it. Often there are sort of flagship projects that are oriented around a specific deliverable or a specific output. So we know that we want to put a report out or a piece out on a particular topic or cover a particular subject. And there will be a project organized around that. And there will be members of the team who are tasked with contributing to the various pieces of work that need to get done in order to complete that project and get that over the line. So we have sort of flagship projects that draw on the entire research team, and then also have to periodically bring in specialized talent that we don't have in-house on an ongoing basis. And the core research team is really focuses a lot of its time on those flagship projects, and then each individual researcher will have other projects that he or she are the project lead on, and that are responsible for advancing. And those things, the way that those get allocated are according to skill, a combination of expertise and skill that fits the project, and also interest and passion, so that people are working on not just things that they're good at, but things that they were really interested and keen on doing. And the project pipeline gets prioritized by our leadership and our founders. And so that's subject to revision on an ongoing basis. But in general, we know on a sort of forward-looking 6-month or so basis what we want to get done and get out the door. And a lot of the research that we do stays internal and doesn't automatically lead to publications, because we don't know what we're going to find, and we have a very sort of open-ended sort of, you might think of it as a basic research mandate. So it's incredibly lucky and very freeing to be able to do that kind of research. Some of it is exploratory, some of it is where we do sort of a broad but shallow look at something. Some of it will be sort of a deep dive if something captivates one of the people on the team and they really want to dig into something and see if there's anything interesting there. But as I say, we do have flagship projects where we know we're planning on putting out a specific publication or other output. And then those really do get probably at any given time, we have 2 or 3 of those on, and they get at least half of our bandwidth, I would say. And then we do manage, temporary folks who come on to do specific things. If somebody knows how to do a particular type of analysis or has a particular depth of knowledge that's outside, again, the skill set of the existing team or the permanent team, I would say, then we shop that out or bring those people on board and work with them on a temporary basis, typically more than a month, but typically less than 6 months, for example, and they'll just be on for the project.
So what do those people, what do their careers look like? They're just sitting out there. They're basically freelance researchers?
It's anybody and everybody who's open to freelance work. And so that includes, it includes academic, scholars and scientists. It includes scholars and scientists who are in industry and who are in consulting. Or I don't think we've had anybody who's like sort of otherwise permanently employed in government doing freelance for us. But these are basically people who are coming in to consult, who are coming in on a consulting basis with us.
Nice.
And it works out pretty well. Sometimes sometimes those pairings and partnerships and collaborations are more productive than others, honestly, but that's to be expected. And then we also, the research team has an obligation, I guess, or just sort of a necessity, I guess is a better way of saying it, to work with expertise that isn't necessarily scientific or research in itself. So, for example, if we have a flagship output we're producing and it needs some really cool visualization, and we aren't quite able to picture exactly what the best way to visualize a concept or data is not as hard to visualize, but or not. I should say we less often require external expertise to figure out how to visualize data. What we often get external assistance with is visualizing concepts. So processes and infographics, and where the purpose of a visualization aid is to communicate a set of ideas or a process or some, a system or flows and that kind of thing in a way that's very understandable, that's very intuitive, that isn't confusing, and so forth. And as you can imagine, scientists are not necessarily automatically great graphic designers or visual, comms people. And there are people who just have blinding talent for those sorts of things once they get the idea that you're trying to communicate. And so we work with those folks. We depending on the project, we also engage external writers and writing expertise and editors and those sorts of things. And so the research team has to work with all of these kinds of folks. We haven't worked with, thankfully, so far, we haven't had to work with either funding and fundraising. I'm consider myself blessed beyond any reasonable likelihood that for not having to do that. I don't write grants or anything like that. The team doesn't have to do that. I don't have as many people. I don't have as big of a team as I would like, and that's coming. So the fundraising that the organization is doing is to facilitate expansion of the team. But for specific research projects, I'm not chasing funding with grant applications or anything. So that's one thing I don't have to do is engage with grantors. Nobody on the team does, and on the research team. And the other thing that we don't have to do is sales, marketing, and promotion stuff. Now there are plans to do more of that as part of the outreach, because we're realizing that ideas are only as good as they're only as valuable as their reach. And if they don't reach anybody, and if you no matter how great your stuff is, if only 100 people or 1,000 people ever read it, it's not making an impact. And so we're going to have to do some of that. But so far, I have not had to talk to anybody or work with anybody directly in sales, marketing, PR, promotion, that sort of thing. But that may come. So far, it's mostly been about working with communications specialists and strategists, not sort of the where that blurs into sales, marketing, advertising, and PR. And I know that sort of, there are boundaries between those worlds, but they do, I guess there is some porosity there, and I don't pretend to understand all of those details. But again, the research team is sort of blessedly isolated from those obligations so far. Although, probably I will personally have to shift into doing a bit more of that as the head of the research team in the future. So that's sort of it in a nutshell. And then, okay. I can talk about some of the things that have proven difficult and how we, tried to get around them. But I would say our biggest challenge with working remotely is time zone differences. Hands down, that's the hardest part.
Yeah, for sure.
No kidding. I mean, it's not. It really is. That is very, very difficult. Much harder than I would have imagined. And the reason why it is, I suppose, is because part of our work culture as an organization is to respect people's boundaries and give people work-life balance. If we didn't do that, if we were one of these more ogreish organizations that didn't care about that and expected work to come first under all circumstances, then it would just be tough cookies. You'd have to be up at 3 or 4 in the morning or whatever it is to be on the Zoom calls. And if you're in the bad time zone, well, that's just too bad. And I can imagine there are, remote teams and remote workers who that's their solution to the time zone problem is whoever's senior gets it in the time zone that's comfortable, and anybody who's junior is up in the middle of the night or first, or the crack of dawn, and that's it. And if they don't like it, they can move, kind of thing. But our organization is decidedly not like that, and so we've struggled to accommodate people with, without unreasonably imposing on individuals unfairly and just to give you an example, there are people in certain time zones who would always have to be the flex in the system, and they would always be the ones who are up at 2 a.m. because it's just more convenient for the other 75% of the team or more to do it at that time. And that would be very unfair if it was only 1 or 2 people who were always having to be that unfortunate flex. And so that's been really difficult. That's tough. Like, what do you do? Do you rotate through the drawing the short straw and having to take the crappy time slot, or that's been difficult. It's been difficult to find a good ongoing solution to that problem of how do you manage the time zones. And just for reference, our time zones are North America, Europe, and Australia, New Zealand, and I suppose that would be a big chunk of Asia, and across all 3 of those, it's very difficult to find a single time that works for everybody that isn't painful for somebody.
Yeah, well, we have the exact same problem whenever we run a class at metauni or do anything, and I've made little visualizations of the reasonable times and where they overlap for those 3 time zones, and I don't believe there is any. It's very difficult. Yeah, somebody's always up either really late in the evening past work hours or really, really early in the morning before reasonable work hours. We're lucky because we do have a few people whose natural inclinations are make them amenable. Like, we have a couple of real early birds on the team who just don't mind being early risers. And, if they 5:30, 6 in the morning is not a huge deal breaking kind of problem for those team members. And that's a real blessing. But, I would struggle to get up at 5 or 5:30 in the morning personally, because I'm a night owl. I'm not a morning person. Yeah. And so that would be harder for me. I mean, I have children, so, there's no getting around doing things in the morning. Obviously, if you have children, you have to be up by 7 or 7:30, no matter what. But 5 o'clock is much more painful for me than 7 o'clock. But for some people, it's not, right. And I'm, just speaking again personally and anecdotally, I don't mind a 10 o'clock at night meeting. I can do that. Some people really don't like that. We have a couple people on my team who struggle with those very, very late night meetings, and fair enough. It's not a reasonable expectation that people should be bringing their full A game and be fully present and fully energized and all that stuff. 12 hours or more into a workday. I mean, that's not a reasonable expectation. And that's the other thing is how do you find a good time slot when everybody's sharp?
because if even if you found a time spot that kind of worked for everybody, the people for whom that's 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the evening, they're never going to be bringing their full A game to any meeting if that's the only time the meetings are.
So what do you think
you're just not sharp at the end of the day. So
yeah, what do you think is the phase of the work to which the remote format is most detrimental? I mean, having supervised students during the lockdowns in Melbourne, I've had master's students who I met once in the 2 years that I was supervising them on a research project. For some of them, it was, I think I'm fairly unusual in that I don't really perceive that much of a difference. So I've had students who I had talked deeply to about math for a year and a half and then met in person and basically didn't feel like they felt like it was a big deal to meet in person, and I really didn't feel there was any difference. So I think in that direction, I'm a little unusual perhaps, but I can tell that there is a difference for many people when in terms of the creative energy that they bring to things, if you're doing it in person versus remotely. I think in my case, I don't get that much of a boost out of it, but it does seem like there's a wide variation among people. So, once you've established the parameters of a research project and you're just doing the work, I feel like probably there isn't too much detriment to doing much of it online if you're doing it well. But I can imagine that at the early stages, seeing through to the nut, the core thing at the heart of a confusing mess is often, it's something that takes maturity and experience, and there's a kind of vulnerability about it. We have to be exploring ideas, and that probably, I imagine, for many people is much easier in person. So do you try and start projects with these how often do you meet in person, and is that what you're doing at those meetings, or is it the priorities different?
Yeah, I would say that this is the other members of the team might have different perceptions. I can only share my own personal perceptions. I can't speak for everybody. And I think, like you said, Dan, there's quite a bit of individual variation. But from my own perspective and in my own experience, the value of getting together in person, and we do that 2 or 3 times a year, we really try to, as a full research team, so the whole research team together, the value there is for sort of big, high-level exploratory work, planning work, and creative work. So if we're sort of scanning a domain, if we're thinking big and outside of the box, if we're being creative and just playful and exploring, where what you really want is very low latency, very high bandwidth, back and forth, sort of throwing ideas around, where you can rapidly iterate and criticize and expand, and you literally have a whiteboard that you can throw things up on the board, and that is being in person. There's no substitute so far for being in person for that, in my experience. That you just get a different vibe when you're in person doing that, and that's a lot of fun and it's great. And so when we are doing sort of project planning or project or domain and topic scanning, where we're really fishing for big ideas or neat insights that then we would go away and explore in depth, there's a lot of value to do that in person. What I think is really great about remote work is that you saturate that very quickly. Like this, if you did that every day, it would, you just wouldn't get much out of it. If you did it even more than once every few weeks, I'm guessing in our case with our team, we probably wouldn't get too much additional insight, or novel advance or value out of it. We do pretty well when we get together once every few months in that way. But what has not worked when we've gotten together in person, and we tried it once, and it didn't work quite so well, was we thought, okay, well, what if we just get together in person and have something like a hackathon where everybody's just there and we're all in the same room, but it's kind of, like what you see in movies where the kid, it's start up in the basement or the dorm room, and then people are just working all hours, and and everybody's there and everybody's available for everybody else, but it's still just heads down at the computer. You're trying to crank stuff out. And now those were failures. Those were not successes. The times we've tried that, we didn't experience more productivity than we would have remotely. And probably it was, for the expense and inconvenience of having to travel and endure, jet lag and all that kind of stuff and do it in hotels and whatnot. We just didn't get the value out of that. So I think probably the research team will not be pushing for future in-person hackathons like that. That just didn't work. Now, but again, we have sort of, different, that's my view. Other leadership folks on the team might have a different view. They may have thought that was more valuable than I did. I didn't see that much additional value there. But there is definitely sort of a magic that you can get in person with creative and exploratory modes of thinking and investigation that you don't get, on a Zoom call. And then the other thing that's been much more successful with as far as remote working, where I think maybe you experienced this too, Dan, where it doesn't feel like there's all that much difference, is one-on-one pairs.
Yeah.
So with a big team, it's different. But what we've discovered is very successful is for two people to get on a Zoom call and have it be long and open-ended. So several times a week, I'll just have an open-ended 2 to 3 hour call, and it will just be at our desk doing our thing, but the call will be open so that you can just, like, as if the person were across the room from you, just say, immediately, oh, hey, have you noticed this? Or what do you think about this? So on and so forth. And that seems to be very effective. You get kind of a little bit of a best of both worlds in those circumstances. But that only seems to work for, the hacking away, the grinding away at the technical, either at technical analysis or at, for example, writing. That's very effective for those things. That isn't the way to do great brainstorming and creative work. For that, we definitely benefit from being in person. And then the other thing I should do is just to circle back to time zones. As pairs, you can almost always find a reasonable time between two time zones. It's getting the three, obviously, as you know, it's getting triangulating all the way around the globe. That's the hard part. Any pair of two you can make work.
Spheres, man. Spheres are terrible.
Yeah, it's awful.
Yeah, okay, so I have lots of questions. How do you avoid just ending up spending all your time managing and not actually doing any real thinking? I imagine that must be on your mind pretty much all the time.
I'm terrible at I mean, one of my great weaknesses is that I avoid management minutia just desperately, like wherever I can. And so what we've done is we've adopted tools that take some of that burden on for the management. So we have a tool set provided. It's the Atlassian tool set, and so they've got a bunch of different tools in that general platform. Confluence is one, Jira is one. These are basically collaboration and work management software tools and environments where you can do Kanban boards and project planning and Gantt charts and all these kinds of things. And so what we've adopted is sort of a software development model where based on tickets and ticketing. And so I do help create and then manage the delivery on tickets, and we ticket up projects on an ongoing basis. We adopt this model called the what is it called? He borrows rugby terms like scrum and stuff like that. It's agile, I think, is the general model there. And that seems to work pretty well, where every couple of weeks we get together and we do a planning session. We make a bunch of work tickets for ourselves, and then on an ongoing basis, we complete the work that's ticketed. We add new tickets as they come and so forth. And that's relieved a lot of the burden of me sort of just hounding people to see where they are and what they're doing and so forth. But it's as a team grows, more and more of a larger and larger fraction of your time as lead gets consumed by management and admin tasks. And I'm sort of feel like I'm approaching the limit where it would start to get very frustrating the split of time. Like right now, I definitely am spending the majority of my time on actual research, which is, again, a blessing, a privilege.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't take, like if we hired another 5 people, I can see
Right.
that balance shifting. So,
Yeah.
and I honestly, that's probably going to happen. I mean, it's just sort of inevitable at some point, I suppose.
Yeah, I find that thought utterly terrifying, to be honest, because it's not clear to me you'd notice that you're becoming a dummy, right? Like, so far you've had, some great insights, and that comes from being in the weeds and just accumulating lots and lots of information and thinking it through, and you don't actually know exactly where the ideas come from. Nobody does, right? It's just like some pretty opaque process that involves lots of time and lots of actually doing the thing. And since you don't know how it works, it can easily be the case that you lose it without knowing that you've lost it, and then you've lost your edge, and maybe you don't know how to get it back. So how do you stop that from happening, Adam?
Oh boy, I mean, that's just that is a question. If I had the answer to that question, I would just be a consultant and we'll go around and tell senior academics and industry scientists and stuff how do you keep your edge and still manage large teams, and how do you juggle all of that? How do you keep the fire burning bright in your own work without basically ascending into management and thus into inconsequential incompetence, right? Some version of the Peter principle is when you kind of ascend out of actual technical work and into management. And I think that, maybe to some extent, systems that were in the old days, systems that were once upon a time based on seniority sort of had a natural rhythm to that, where you're when you're young and you're energetic and you've got your most mental acuity and energy and probably going to do your most original thinking, and you're at your most tireless. You can work all night and you can all that kind of stuff. So basically, especially in your 20s and I suppose in your 30s. You would be doing that, and then at some point you would become more senior, and the fire hose of originality and brilliant research would slow to a trickle, and it would be just time for you to age out of that role and into a more senior role. And one of the things for senior people to do, especially with the benefit of all the experience and learning lots of hard lessons, is just manage. And there's a sense in which in some sense that is reasonable. I think there are a lot of things that can be very toxic about that too. In academia, you have senior folks taking credit for all of the work that junior people do, and that's rotten. And you've got downsides to it. But there was some sort of natural rhythm to it. I don't know and I can certainly imagine vocations and professions throughout history, occupations of various different kinds being similar to that, right? Where you do the hard work. The slog work in the very early stages of your career, the brilliant, original, and beautiful, and creative, and masterfully skillful stuff in the middle of your career, and then sort of the management stuff at the end of the career when your body's worn out and your eyes are gone and you just can't, you can't swing the hammer on the anvil, or you can't hold the paintbrush steady, or whatever it is. And I mean, I'm serious. Going back thousands of years, you can imagine, you can imagine the natural rhythm to occupying certain roles within these sorts of things. But yeah, this is all my way of just dodging your question, which is I have no idea what the best way to manage this very difficult and age-old challenge is. How do you continue to stay sharp and stay in the fray when you take on additional responsibilities for managing team and others and so forth. And it's hard. It's hard to do it all. I don't really know. I really don't know. I suppose probably one thing would be bring on people whose entire role is to manage people and processes. So just bring on specialists whose that's their expertise is management.
Yeah.
And have sort of a translation layer between the senior decision making person and their that layer of responsibility, and then the coordinating layer. And I guess this is the reason why organizations have middle management, for better or worse, right? Of course, the problem is that entire layer can be easily corrupted because its incentives are often quite, conflicting and perverse and so forth. But yeah, I mean, middle management is where everything goes to die and what happens to bureaucracies and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. This is where you'd have to get into management theory and organizational org theory and all that kind of stuff, and how do organizations grow and stay effective and stay agile, and what's the right structure. Beats me. I really don't know. I have not had to deal with much of that yet because our team is so small. And then, of course, the other piece, and and this is due credit to everybody else at Rethink X who I've ever worked with, and that is I with very few exceptions, I've only ever worked with remarkably smart, talented, passionate, driven, and responsible people. We really have not had any real duds. And the truth is that really great people don't need much management. To the contrary, you need to get the hell out of their way. And your job as a manager is to clear obstacles from the path of brilliant people, not to make them jump through stupid hoops and fill out forms or whatever and attend pointless meetings and crap like that. That we all hear from the likes of Dilbert, that corporate and and government and bureaucratic culture that gets so counterproductive and full of bullshit jobs. I have been very fortunate to never have to really deal with any of that because the people I've been working with have been so great. And that, of course, is an incredible privilege. But, if you're in government and somebody's got a position and they're there for life, and they're 25 years into a 30 or 40 year career, you're not going to have them at their most energetic and most passionate, but you're stuck. You're going to have to work with that. And that's a much, 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 much different proposition and much bigger challenge from a management standpoint than anything I've had to deal with. So I count myself again, just like privileged and lucky and blessed on almost every single level.
So on a different topic, how do you manage feedback loops when you're trying to produce fundamental research? I mean, I imagine in academia, there's a whole established ecosystem of feedback loops, right? So there's in-department seminars. There are, of course, you're talking to your local group, to your local department. There are conferences, there are workshops, there's journals. That's all a way of keeping each other honest over long periods of time. And it's not perfect, but it's incredibly successful compared to anything else we ever tried in history in terms of creating knowledge that remains more or less believed to be true and accumulates over time, and we actually do make progress in some areas of science. How do you, as a body that's outside that, sort of reproduce that ability to know you're not fooling yourself and actually make progress and build on the things you've done? I mean, you said a lot of it, what you're doing isn't published. The things that aren't published, is there an internal publishing mechanism where you have some sort of ritual marker of a thing being complete at a level of quality? Or is it just like half-assed research notes that sit on somebody's computer and it's kind of like, I kind of finished that, but never really brought it to some final form? So I notice this would be one of the things I find the most different about academia and the AI safety community that we've discussed in some previous seminars, where there's a culture there of producing these posts on Less Wrong, which are sometimes almost at the level of a paper, very rarely at the level of a published paper in terms of the level of attention and proofreading and careful checking that in principle goes into published work. But it sometimes gets relatively close. But often it's not, and that's okay. That's part of the norm, and that's their way of doing things. But I find it very uncomfortable, I have to say, because I notice that people incorporate the ideas in these quasi-finished documents into their way of thinking about things in a way that I don't think has enough of a sense of hygiene. So my mental model of the world is my most precious artifact. I've spent decades accumulating it. I know that the things in there are correct. I know what they depend on. And that is the thing that I value very, very highly, and I'm very cautious about incorporating new ideas into it. And I have quite a high standard for doing so, and that's normal, I think. And so I'm very interested in how you maintain your like epistemic standards as a small group that's often thinking rather differently to the outside world. So how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a real challenge because we are in this we've taken on this strange role, which is explicitly unorthodox and explicitly, not contrarian, but we only produce knowledge that runs, outside of the mainstream in some way or another, right? I mean, that's it's right there in the name of the organization. So there's that. That's just sort of a basic posture that we adopt a priori, is that we're looking to think differently about topics, and that presents immediately its own challenges for things like peer review. Although we have a trusted circle of advisors. You could think of them as a advisory board on different topics. The majority of them so far are sort of have these are silent relationships where people are where we trust them and they have great respect for us, but it's not a publicly disclosed relationship. So in other words, we have sort of go-to people who we really trust and whose opinions really, really matter to us, that we take our close to complete drafts of our research work to get feedback. So there is sort of a semblance of a peer review in that we ask for people we perceive to be peers for their review, and when they provide it, we take it very seriously. But it's less of a formal institution and more of a part of our methodology, I would say. So there's that. The another thing that from the research team standpoint is that there is a gap between the team and the founders of the organization. And we're in this extraordinary position. Again, it's mold breaking. I don't know of other organizations really that are like this, but we're in this extraordinary position where the founders of the organization are themselves really quite extraordinary thinkers in some of the domains and some of the topics that we're doing research in. And they have sort of a meta expertise about disruption itself, and can evaluate and weigh in on the significance of any specific research about a particular disruption in a particular area. And what that allows us to do basically is that we are able to take findings to our patrons, in other words, to the founders and who are responsible for supporting the research team and who make our totally open-ended and independent research possible. We're actually able to take our basic research findings to those founders and get input on whether or not we've discovered something that is useful or meaningful or significant or exciting. And I can imagine circumstances where that wouldn't be possible. And in particular, it's not a secret, so I can name them, but Tony Seba and James Arbib are both, in their own right, extraordinary individuals with extraordinary minds. And both of them know an amazing idea or a breakthrough when they see it. And that is absolutely not the case for, typical head of an organization or founder of an organization of any kind, right? Lots of times the people at the top are bozos, and maybe they've got deep pockets or for one reason or another, or they've got, power influence for one reason or another. But in a lot of ways, it's an exercise in futility and frustration to take, dense discoveries and stuff like that to the very top. With us, it's not. There are sort of our bellwether, our lodestone. When we find something really interesting, Tony and Jamie are who we take it to determine whether or not we've discovered something really significant or not. And So that's an unusual thing. That's a real privilege. Now, the head of the research team, I guess, can also play that role. So if anybody on the team discovers something or finds a line of inquiry that's starting to yield something that they think is interesting, it comes to me, and I'm decent. I think I'm pretty good at spotting a good idea or something meaningful or significant when I see it. But I'm very privileged to be able to go further up the chain to the founders and to get really, really valuable, good input from them. And then, as I said, we do go outside as well to kind of reality check that. But then, having said that, we're in this situation where we are operating in a bubble, in a sense. I mean, everybody on our team could, in principle, agree that we found something that's really important, and we could publish it and tell the world, and the world could just laugh at us. I mean, there's always a risk with our work. And Tony's been doing that for 15 years, and he was alone for 10 of those years, way out on a limb alone, saying things that were unequivocally ridiculed. Yeah. Unequivocally, just mercilessly ridiculed. And of course, he had the courage of his convictions, and time has, almost completely vindicated those convictions. So that's very, very impressive. And of course, after having done that has given him and given the rest of us a lot of confidence in his abilities to know a good idea, as I said, when he sees it. So that's all. This is all just very good fortune and happenstance. It's a difficult model to replicate, I think. I honestly don't know what the best way to go about it would be, to replicating this model would be. But we do. You asked one other set of questions. I'll answer briefly, and that is, how do we maintain sort of an epistemic and otherwise methodological and process discipline? How do we do good work? And I think part of that is part of that happens because we bring good people onto the team. Part of that happens because of the culture and the way that we've just cultivated the right set of values, I think, that makes that acceptable, right? So there's no penalty for having gone down a blind alley. If there were, that would be a toxic environment, because then people would just be terrified to make a mistake. People would, and you can see this in other organizations. I think some corporations are sort of famous for this, where they set up toxic incentives, where people are competing against one another when they should be collaborating. People are afraid to do the kind of research you really would need to do, because it might not yield spectacular results, or it might fail to replicate or something. So one of the things that's effective about our organization is that we don't penalize that free exploration. That does mean we end up having a lot of quite a few dead ends. This is just something that happens. But then to kind of not be sloppy about that, we again lean on tools, and the tools that we've adopted in recent years. We've used a few over the years. But the ones we're using again recently in the Atlassian suite of stuff, we basically have a wiki. Confluence, in my mind, is kind of like a wiki for the team, where you create pages, and it's it's supported. It's basically markup supported, so you can fully format it and hyperlink it and all those kinds of things. And all of our work, all of our research, everything that goes with it, everything we discover, all of the writing, all of the notes, all of the sources, all of the files, all of that stuff gets embedded in these pages. These Confluence pages, which are like an internal wiki team page. And every project has pages that are associated with it, and you can see who's done what, which people have done which work. There's versioning that's very effective, so you can roll back and so forth. And then if something reaches a close, it gets signed off on by me, and and again, I said the work is broken up into ticketed quantity, so you sort of
Sorry,
things
Adam,
are tasked
I'm just gonna
out.
have to step away for 1 minute. I apologize. I'll
Sure.
be back.
And so the general picture there is that there's a good trail of documentation of the research work as it's happening and as it's being done, and even if that trail goes cold and doesn't yield as much fruit as we would like, the trail is still there and could be picked up at some point in the future. The trail could be revisited at any time. It isn't sort of lost in zillions of different files. on offline on an individual computer or anything like that. It's all online, and the entire team has access to everything that everybody's doing, at least in principle. So yeah, that's the workflow process that I think keeps us honest, but allows us to be open and free in how we explore the things that interest us. And I've already talked about, sort of what our process is for defining the pipeline, and when we meet regularly, and we do get the input from our founders into what our priorities research wise ought to be, where we ought to be looking, and what things we ought to be working on, and which things are sort of free and open-ended exploration versus which things are more targeted towards delivering a specific output, like a report. And yeah, but all of this is made easier, much easier, by the fact that we have a small team. Every person on that team is valuable and competent and passionate and hardworking and responsible. And we are equipped as a team with good tools, with things that make this work much easier than it would have been 20 years ago. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell. And I don't think any of this is secret or proprietary. I don't feel like I'm disclosing, I'm laying our cards on the table that people shouldn't be seeing. It's just all perfectly fine. Yeah. And I should say, that the research team has the benefit of having an admin team supporting us. I mean, we're not solo. We have a lot of support from administrative staff and our CEO, which is more senior management, the founders who take care of things like funding and so forth. So it's yeah, we really are in a great position where we just get to focus on the work itself. So
yeah, okay, that covers a lot of the things I wanted to ask you about. Let me think. If there's anything else you think I might be interested to know, feel free to start talking about that. Well, yeah, I guess
I'm trying to think if I would do anything differently, or if there were anything sort of things that
I mean, how do you?
Yeah, I guess I wish I'd known about the value of these paired working sessions sooner rather than later. We've only been doing those. It's only been about a year since we started having these. Just okay, we're going to get on Zoom at 9 a.m. The call's going to be open from 9 to noon, and that's it. Just the two of us are just going to have the open call. And I wish I'd known to do that sooner. That's been really valuable.
So is there a pressure or a norm that this is like actual conversation for an hour?
No, that's the thing. I mean, there could be 15 or 30 minutes of silence on the call where you're just head down working. But the call's open. And what it does is I think it just keeps your feet to the fire. Like, you're just not going to drift off into Twitter land or whatever. You're just not going to, procrastinate. You're just, it's like having it's like having a coworker sitting next to you. You're just not going to fuck off in the same way that you might. And it's just healthy. It's good. You guys, you keep each other honest and accountable. And you're available, for instantaneous feedback. Oh, and we have other tools. I mean, we've been using Slack, for example, for a long time. And during work hours, people are pretty darn quick in responding on Slack to messages and stuff. Yeah. But it's still not the same as like literally being able to call out, hey, what about this thing? It's just, there's a low latency there that just isn't comparable. So
yeah, that's useful.
I find that really, really, really useful. I would certainly give it a try early on and see if you get value out of it. And then I've also noticed that some pairings work better than others, because some people, when we've discovered, those two really pair up a lot, 2-3 times a week, and it makes them very productive. And so, you sort of discover people that you work really well with, I think.
So apart from publishing the reports, and then I suppose you go and talk to people who have read them and are interested in them, is your team or people, I mean, I guess your founders are often speaking at conferences and so on, but how often do you or the team attend events like that where you're interacting with other research groups? Is it mostly post publication, or I mean, how does Rethink X sort of interface with the rest of think tank slash academia slash NGO land?
Yeah, that's I think we need to do a better job of. We honestly haven't interfaced very much. We were just starting to get into a mode where we were doing that before the pandemic, and then the pandemic just kind of that entire network and collaborative sort of push for the organization. It shut that down, and we're sort of in the process of setting that back up. So we don't really attend other events all that often. I mean, one of us might go if it's something we've been invited to speak at or something like that. But we don't sort of get together for conferences the way that academic researchers do. I think what we are planning on doing more of is trying to host events where parts of our audience that are interested in adopting and then using some of the tooling, some of the tools and techniques that we use internally that we've at least partly developed, like how to analyze disruptions and their implications for your industry or your business or your community or your city or whatever, maybe your entire country. We want to equip people with that, with those capabilities, and we are planning on hosting events for that, as opposed to sort of attending, third-party events and that sort of thing. There really isn't a forum where we get together with other similar, such as they are, organizations, other think tanks and stuff, and sort of compare notes and things like that. That we really haven't done. And then as individual researchers, we do go to things. So if there's a event where there's a particularly interesting or particularly admissive access to something where we would be difficult to get access otherwise, then one or more people on the team might attend that event. So we've attended clean energy, solar events, electric vehicle events, food technology events, that kind of thing, where we go to trade shows and conferences and that kind of stuff. We've sent people. We're invited to, as you can imagine, we're invited to stuff constantly. But we very, very, very rarely attend unless it's something we think we can't get access to really very easily otherwise, or if we're just sort of thinking, well, this would be really a good place to go fishing for new ideas and insights. And as I said, COVID kind of shut that down a bit. But the think tanks are a little bit different. I think we're probably more isolated and cloistered than is healthy. It'd be better if there was more of a community, more interaction, but we don't engage with that.
I mean, I guess on the plus side, it's easier to maintain the attitude of everybody's a fucking idiot. Look, here's the real way it is. Oh my God, I can't believe everybody's missed this basic observation. Dummies. Not that I'm saying that is your attitude, but it's easier to maintain that attitude where it's correct if you're not embedded into the wider community, which, I mean, it's reversion to the mean and groupthink, which produces these blind spots. I suppose it's an advantage to avoid it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I mean, we have sort of two things that help us do that. One is this, the mandate of the organization itself, right? So we don't suffer from the sorts of incentives that lead to conformity. And many other organizations, including think tanks, do. Where, I mean, if you've got a client who's paying for a specific piece of research and they're kind of angling for a specific finding, and your entire model as an organization depends on that kind of funding coming in, well, you can get your incentives can lead you to a very specific kind of understanding and away from other, potentially more accurate or more realistic understandings, right? The famous Upton Sinclair quote, it's hard to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it. Okay, fair enough. So there's a lot of that sort of incentive in the consulting world and plenty of it in the think tank world, and a perfectly large amount of it in the academic world too. I mean, if your grants are coming from certain sources, they're just going to keep funding things that where the research produces the sorts of things that they like to hear, and you can get sucked into that world and never leave, right? I mean, there are I've openly spoken disparagingly about certain academic researchers here at University of Michigan who still are focused on hydrogen vehicles and fuel cells and stuff like that, and this is just it's pointless and silly at this point. So there's that. There's the fact that my organization is set up specifically to avoid those sort of toxic conformity inducing incentives. Then the other piece of it, I think you said, groupthink, is, if you always go to the same cocktail parties and the same bars and talk to the same people, you're naturally going to converge and conform with the ideas and thinking, unless it's an extraordinary culture of open-mindedness, contrarian, behavior and so forth, right? It's the natural human inclination is to groupthink and conform and to align with other people, not, pushed against one another deliberately. It's a miracle that the scientific culture and the scientific enterprise writ large ever emerged at all, given natural human biases and inclinations. It's pretty miraculous. But yeah, if we were attending conferences and everybody was sort of constantly doing different things, great and small, to get on the same wavelength and get on the same page, well, that would make my job of rethinking things a lot harder. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's probably one reason why we are not naturally gravitating towards those opportunities to do that. I wouldn't say we're sort of expressly avoiding them. And we do want other people to see things from our perspective to the extent that we think we have things more right and less wrong than others. But yeah, there's something to be said for having a small team of very independent and independently minded people who are free to just pursue truth wherever it takes them, as they see it. And so that's, it has, I think, its downsides as well. We can certainly, bullshit ourselves and end up thinking things that are, nonsense. There's also always, of course, the potential to become overcommitted to an idea that you're vested in because of, past success, and it's given you some fame or glory or notoriety or whatever. And it could be that, you really don't want those ideas to turn out to be wrong. So you don't look very hard for evidence to invalidate them. And that takes a lot of discipline to not do that. But yeah, we front load all of it by trying not to make stupid mistakes up front. That's what we try very hard to do that. And then you don't have to worry quite as much about having had made stupid mistakes down the road. But inevitably we'll discover we were wrong about all kinds of different things. And then you have to be able to take that on board gracefully and move forward. So yeah. So far, we haven't had to backtrack or apologize too much on anything. We've had a, quite a remarkable track record of success with our stuff, but we've been very careful with what we've said too. So
yeah.
Oh, and I suppose that's that's one other thing that's very important to keep in mind. And I don't know how relevant it is for you. And that is that my team and our founders 100% prioritize quality over quantity. And I'm sure you've noticed that. Like, we do not crank stuff out. I mean, we've gone more than a year at a stretch between publishing major things. And so we are absolutely a quality over quantity organization. And we've gotten a lot of respect and value, brand value, sort of out of that, as opposed to other outfits who just are under pressure to just crank the stuff out. And then, if stuff's got to be out by next Friday, well, if it's crap, it's crap. It's got to get out. It's got to go out the door. It's got to get it published. And there are many more outfits, many more think tanks, consultancies, and whatnot that are operating under that time pressure and quantity pressure rather than quality. And again, that is a just silly privilege to have, but it's paid off so far.
Yeah, from the outside, this is perhaps the most remarkable thing. Is just the ratio of hits to misses. I'm not aware of any misses, but the the patience you guys have to do things and do them right. It's to be honest, puts academia to shame sometimes, right? This is not a set of incentives that this is actually the purpose of academia, but and somehow we've in many places lost that.
Well, I mean, again, I have to give credit where it's due. That is the founders who make that possible, right? So the founders are willing to make huge investments in the team. I mean, it's expensive to pay, a team of people, highly skilled, well-credentialed, well-qualified people. That's expensive, and then to pay them to quietly toil away without knowing what you're going to get, if you're going to get anything, for great extended periods at a time. I mean, that's a huge risk, and you do have to have very deep pockets and a tolerance for that kind of risk in order to do that. And our founders, to their credit, are able to bring those things to the organization, and that's marvelous.
That's great. But isn't that what a government is for? Patient.
Well, yeah, I mean,
long-term funding.
And what a hugely endowed. A university with tens of billions of dollars in endowment, you would imagine that would be what it was for as well, and what tenure is for, and those sorts of things. The other thing is that the benefit of a small team is that no individual person can disappear into the ether, into the through the cracks or into the bureaucracy and just vanish. And so all of us are ultimately accountable. And if you never produced anything, that wouldn't be viable. Yeah. But the organization does have a degree of patience and faith in its talent that is really remarkable. And so, yeah, I like the way you phrase that, Dan. We've had a remarkable string of hits and hopefully not too many misses. But that is 100% enabled by the culture and the values that the founders have made possible for us.
Although, so, where's the AI report? Cough.
Yeah. Well, hey, I've been. This is you. It's funny you mention it, but this Owen and I and Tony spent 6 months working and thinking about this, and I don't think the trail's gone completely cold yet, and I haven't given up on having any deliverable from it. But we were not able to let's just say that we were not able to achieve the level of insights or quality that we normally aspire to in this domain. And so the basic decision is, if we don't have something extraordinary and useful to say on this topic, even though we've spent months investigating it, we are not going to say anything. And another organization would not be able to stomach that what's the right word where you've what's the phrase where sunk cost? Yes, sunk cost. Other organizations would not be able to stomach the sunk cost of that, but we're able to do that. So, and it would be trivial to put out something shallow and full of buzzwords and jargon that ultimately didn't say anything novel or interesting. It'd be easy to do that. Yeah. And probably a lot of our audience would even wish we would do that. I think many of our audience is really quite impatient and would rather have more content, even if it was a little shallower. But so far that culture has really not been in that direction. So I agree. It's ideally, this is what academia should be. And the public should support our great research institutions so that exactly these sorts of circumstances exist for the sorts of people that we're able to bring into those, the great, brilliant minds and talent. I mean, yes, this is in a perfect world, that's exactly what the best universities would be. It's just havens, homes, oases for exactly this kind of culture and values and the output that would come from it. I think the reality is it's every big institution and organization can slowly, can slowly drift from its its aspirations and mission. And so, yeah.
Well, then some people have to rebuild it somewhere else, like you. So,
And
I
like
have
you,
a,
and like here, in a rebuild it in a completely new way, virtually. Why not?
so I have a question about how you continue to push people beyond their boundaries in a context of a small research organization. So, I mean, you have very talented people with deep backgrounds in various different fields. One of the things that's wrong with academia often is that people, I mean, there's virtue to going very deep and narrow, but I think sometimes the trade-off goes too far in that direction because of some of these incentives. You get rewarded for continuing mostly to do what you're good at in academia. This doesn't really serve individual researchers or the public good infinitely, pursued to kind of ridiculous conclusion of ever narrower, ever more iterative work that lets you climb some internal status ladder but isn't really actually progressing science or serving the higher good. The way, I mean, I'm not actually sure of the mechanism by which you kind of jolt people enough. I mean, this doesn't really happen that reproducibly, even in academia, but it does happen where people, at least within fields, people go to conferences, they hear about things nearby, but a bit far away, they get interested, they talk to people, they maybe collaborate, and that's how people pick up new areas. And often a lot of the cross-pollination from that is where great breakthroughs come from. You know, an expert in lasers talking to somebody from biology or something. No apparent reason to do that, but it happens for one reason or another. Maybe they're at an institution together and across the lane from one another on a campus. I could imagine that especially if you're doing remote work, and especially if you're not communicating much with the outside world, it's not naturally the case that people will take it upon themselves to pick up a completely different domain. Although the way you work on projects and you're very promiscuous in the topics you study, I guess brings people to study a different thing every 6 months or so. Is that kind of the main mechanism by which you keep people fresh and picking up new knowledge? It's just they're put on projects, and projects cover such a wide range of science and technology. Is that basically how you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a little bit of a challenge right now in the organization, which is that, because of the work some of us have done over a number of years, we have become sort of domain experts, or maybe not experts. I would, I don't want to toot our own horn in there, but to the extent that we have expertise or at least competence, there's a focus that individuals end up, having just by the nature of how they've worked on projects over the over the course of the last several years. So I've worked on a lot of energy things, and that's become more of my focus. Some of the other team members have worked more on food, others on more on transportation and so forth. And so they get expertise built up that way in the domain. But generally speaking, the way that I have I think avoided that, the sort of the problem of people stagnating is that it really isn't like when we bring people onto the team, we don't bring them on, at least the permanent members, we haven't brought them on for their knowledge or domain expertise. We've brought them on because of their skills and aptitudes. And then those skills and aptitudes can be applied to lots of different topics across lots of different domains. And so, for example, if we bring on a mathematician like Owen, he's got the skill set that can be applied in really interesting and useful ways across every domain that we're looking at: food, energy, transportation, materials, healthcare, shipping, logistics, specific industries like steel or recycling or water. And so it isn't that we brought on a water expert when we want to do water, or a food expert when we want to do food. It's more that we bring on people with certain skills and aptitudes, and then they again, according to passion and interest, gravitate towards specific topics that they're keen to apply those skills to. And because the topics evolve and change over time, I think people stay fresh that way. What we need to do a better job of, frankly, is skill building, where people are a member of the team who doesn't have a set of skills but wants to continue expanding their skill set has an opportunity to do that development. And we've done that with one or two of our junior research team members, but that's all been voluntary and self-directed, and we've fully supported it. So a junior member on the team wanted to move in the direction of building software development, software engineering skills, and so we supported that. But the I think the main thing that keeps people fresh and passionate is that they can shift topic and domain, and work on things that new things, new areas, new things. So yeah, that's how we've done it so far. But I do keep in mind that it's a fairly young organization. I mean, we've only been around 5 years, so I have not yet had the full sweep of entire careers to see how do people really come into an organization and build and execute an entire career there and have full arc of coming in, and then going through their professional developments and all of that kind of stuff within the organization. So at a larger, older, more mature organization, you would see that entire process where people's whole careers have an arc to them within the organization, and the organization would need to be set up to support that if it was worth its salt. And we're simply too young to have done much of that great arc of somebody's career. But I certainly hope we're supporting people and allowing them to flourish and develop in ways that are to some significant extent self-directed, certainly in the directions that people are passionate about. And then we have had one or two people leave the organization for greener pastures, basically because other companies just made them offers they couldn't refuse, right? Yeah. And so poaching is a real thing. We've all, I think, all of us, maybe not some of our very newest people, but certainly I can say most of the team have had suitors approach. But the thing is, the only thing that other organizations are really able to offer is more money.
Yeah.
And that's understandable if somebody wants to take that, certainly. But I think most of the people on my team would say, it would be very difficult to find a better job that's better, meaning anything other than higher paying. Like if it's every day, all of us, I think, probably feel we're pretty damn lucky to be able to get paid at all to do the things that we love to do that are just amazing. It's a privilege. And if I won the lottery tomorrow, I wouldn't change anything. I just keep doing what I'm doing because this is what I love doing. And very, very few people can say that, right? So, I mean, and there's obviously, unless you've won the lottery, literally or figuratively, then there's always some amount of, everybody's got their price, right? Are the McKinseys of the world or the, Shell oil companies of the world, I mean, are they going to come along and write a big enough check to lure somebody like me away? Well, probably not, right? I mean, presumably there's some check that's large enough. Especially if the contract were short enough, like, I'd take $10 million for a year and, go through the motions and then quit, right. Take the money and come back to Rethink X. I mean, obviously
hold my beer, Tony.
Yeah, exactly. Just hold my beer, Tony. I'll be back. So far, no takers on that. But hey, I'm, if anybody's listening, I'm available if you're writing a 7-figure check.
Before we run out of time, I want to ask about seminar culture, which is a thing I mean, very well from academia, and I don't know how it was in your part of academia, but in math, it's definitely rather central. The way we run seminars and metauni is kind of a reflection of that culture. And I wonder why more people don't do this actually within the business world or within government or just outside of academia in general, because I notice with my own students that the mechanism by which I get them to actually think properly, I mean, they come to me very bright already, but and many of them Some of them don't need any tuning up, but those that do, it's very hard to have that conversation in a vacuum. But if I get them to prepare a talk, then every talk they give after it, I can be like, okay, here's the way in which you didn't prepare properly. You're confused about this. You didn't know you were confused. Don't do this, don't do that. And it's partly about the talk itself and the mechanic of giving good talks. But giving good talks is basically the art of thinking well in public and thinking well in conversation with other people. If you haven't given many talks, I think you don't actually really learn to think on your feet as well as you might. So it's an excellent discipline, and one of the few ways of really having a collegial way of imposing that kind of discipline on thought. And it strikes me as a bit surprising that this ritual isn't more widely used for that purpose. So I don't think you run seminars internally, and I'm wondering why.
And I should. I mean, we should run seminars, and I've thought of doing something maybe a little less formal, more like a book club, where we sit. The main thing is that you have to have the discipline to set aside the time to let people do that work, as opposed to their meeting their other responsibilities and so forth. And that's tough to do. It's hard to justify. But I really should. And we've talked about it in the past, that we should just set aside, a time, and where people are, bring something interesting to talk about to the team. And it isn't, all shop. It isn't all work related. It's just something, something else, some other topic or other domain of interest or something. And we have talked about that. And frankly, I should revisit that.
Well, it doesn't have to be doesn't have to be a foreign topic. I mean, even just, it's very hard to find the time to read
formality of getting organized. Yeah, I completely agree with that. Yeah. Dan, I'm really sorry. I do have a hard stop right now at 7:30. I've got to go. But yeah, the value of seminars, you're living and breathing it. It's right here, and it's super, super important. So I deeply believe in it. I've got to walk the walk on that. I'm gonna take that to my team. In our team, we'll bring that up tomorrow on the research call, and I'll let you know how it goes next week.
Cool. Thanks, Adam. Good to talk to you.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
See ya.